Hello, in this video we'll be discussing the ACORNS 2019-2020 work plan and going over how to fill this out and what should be included on it. So this is the work plan template. You can find this here right after the RFP in the RFP package. This first page is mostly a glossary of terms to help you understand what each of the sections of the work plan mean and what you should be including and incorporating in that. So please familiarize yourself with this glossary of terms. It is there to be helpful, and I do think that you will find it very helpful when trying to fill out your work plan template. Here is where you'll put your tier number, and then please write the name of the tribe or the tribal health program that you're applying on behalf of in this section. So this first page, you won't fill anything out except for your tier and your tribal health program. You'll then move down to the first page, and this is where you're going to select your different project strategies. So in previous videos, we talked about how there's 4 main project strategies that are focused on preventing obesity, preventing and controlling the use of commercial tobacco, supporting type 2 diabetes prevention, and also supporting heart disease and stroke prevention. So these are the 4 main strategies. So for each objective that you're going to be working on, you're going to be selecting just one project strategy. The next section is your project activity. In the instructions here, it says select project activity associated with selected project strategy. Now, before we get too far in here, I want to reference the strategies, activities, and outcomes resource, which is included in the RFP. This will be very instrumental and very helpful in applying for and filling out the required work plan and evaluation form. So this is sort of like a really instrumental resource. So let me open that. Okay, so here we have it. So here on the top section, you have the strategy number 1. Again, this is going to be, hopefully it will start sounding really familiar, but strategy 1 is the one related to preventing obesity. And this first column is the list of activities. These activities are very high level, meaning that they're broad. So the first one, for example, is improve tribal food and beverage programs and systems. So that can be implementing community gardens, establishing a farmer's market, creating public transportation routes to food stores, or increasing access to healthy foods at community venues or schools, or using service guidelines and nutrition standards, or implementing food policies. So if the activity is improve tribal food and beverage systems, that's a very high level, so very broad activity. So you will actually be identifying in your objectives and your further activities how you're going to be implementing that. This next, and there's several activities associated with each strategy. The next column is your short-term outcomes. These are your 1 to 3 year outcomes. So things that could be accomplished in about 1 to 3 years. And each activity has an associated short-term outcome if you just go all across this table. So this outcome is increased number of places offering healthy food. So if that is our ultimate outcome, thinking about how you would implement this food and beverage program or activity in order to meet that short-term outcome. Furthermore, there's intermediate outcomes. These are 3 to 5 year outcomes. So again, these are things that probably won't happen in 1 year, but hopefully could happen over the course of this 5-year grant as we continue to work on these activities. So these should intuitively match up. So you'll notice that this activity goes across. It has 2 intermediate outcomes. This activity has 1 short-term outcome and 2 intermediate outcomes. This one is these are all 3 related to breastfeeding. They all have the same short-term outcome, and then they share 2 intermediate outcomes. So that's for strategy 1 to prevent obesity. As you scroll down, there's a table for strategy 2. This is related to prevention and control of commercial tobacco use. Again, strategy 3, which is our type 2 diabetes prevention, activities, outcomes, and intermediate outcomes. And then 4, our support for heart disease and stroke prevention. So these will be very essential in helping you fill out the work plan. So going back to our work plan, the project strategy is one of those 4 project strategies that I just went over. The project activity will be one of these. So you will copy and paste exactly this activity or whatever activity you're selecting as part of that objective. So again, this is higher level, so it's very broad. So then as you fill out your work plan template, this is the activity, but your objective will actually be the specific actions you will be taking to accomplish that project activity. In this section for short-term outcome, based off the activity that you selected, so if I selected establish culturally appropriate and accessible lactation support services as my activity, and my strategy was to prevent obesity, I selected this as my activity. In the short-term outcome portion on my work plan, I would copy and paste S1.1, which is increased number of places that implement culturally adapted continuity of care and support strategies to promote and support breastfeeding. Okay, so again, you're using this table to help you fill out your work plan template. So this whole section is going to be filled out using the strategies, activities, and outcomes document. So you'd copy and paste your associated short-term outcome. For the intermediate outcome, again, you're going to move across that table. And if this is what I selected, the A1.4, my short-term outcome is S1.3. And then my intermediate outcome, these are really similar. It's increased number of breastfeeding mothers and then increased percent improvement. So if we went from 5% of mothers breastfeeding to 10% of mothers breastfeeding, that would be a 5% increase. So there's a percentage increase that we're looking for, as well as just a basic number increase. So you can select either one of those, whichever one you feel like you could track or evaluate more or easier. So you would just move across the table for whatever your activity is, then it's associated short-term outcome, and then it's associated intermediate outcome. And the reason we want to do this is because with any grant project or program that we're developing, we want to make sure that we're actually designing it to work towards our goals. So if these are our strategies, this is our activity, we want it to really directly link to the outcomes that we're looking for. And so we should always be keeping those outcomes in mind, and you should be familiar with what those outcomes are, and so that your project is designed to actually meet those outcomes. Now, this objective piece is where you get to be, where you're going to be writing in and kind of creating your project. So up until this point, this has sort of been written for you. This is the framework or the structure of the grant and what we're trying to accomplish. Now, these objectives and activities is where you get to be more creative and you get to tailor your selected activity to your community and figure out how do you want to increase support for breastfeeding at your clinic or in your tribe, or how do you want to improve the food and beverage systems, or how do you want to increase the screening rates for people living with diabetes, or how do you want to improve the educational opportunities and prevention programs that exist for people with at risk for developing diabetes. So these are where you get to fill in your project, basically. So your objectives should be measurable if possible, and then the activities listed here, again, we're working from really broad, so the project strategy and the project activities, it's broad, you get a little bit more specific, and then with the objectives, you get a little bit more specific, and the activities are really sort of those step-by-step things that you're going to be doing to implement or to reach your objective. So if you can imagine an upside down triangle, our project strategy is that top base layer, and then as we go down closer to the point, our activities and tasks are kind of the point of that triangle. And again, that triangle is all leading to our intended outcomes. So hopefully that sort of makes sense in a logical flow, that all the work that we're doing with this project is done intentionally and for a purpose of meeting those larger goals. So objective is a kind of a little bit broader, but also specific accomplishment. And again, this will be done by or within this project year. So these sort of activities and strategies aren't necessarily going to be accomplished or achieved by the end of year one. However, what you write in the objective and the activities section will be completed within year one. Likely you will select and probably work on a similar strategy or a similar activity over the course of the first 2 years, or maybe 3 years, or maybe all 5 years. You really want to focus on diabetes prevention, and everything that you do is going to be focused on strategy for it. And maybe you implement a couple different activities in order to do that. But this bottom section is going to be your this year activities. This is sort of your scope of work that you're planning out. So that's your objective. The activities are the step-by-step actions you'll be taking to complete your objective. The timeline is when you're planning on having that done. So oftentimes with a project, we know that you need to do things in sequence. So if my goal is to increase participation in diabetes prevention programs, you know, maybe the first thing I want to do is understand what diabetes prevention programs exist in my community. It's really hard for me to develop strategies if I don't know what the baseline is or what's already going on. So just kind of logically speaking, there's a certain time frame that things need to be accomplished by, often in order to move on to the next step. So this is where you would set your goal. So over the course of the project period, all the timeline dates should be within the project period, which is January 4th to September 14th of 2020. So this is your timeline. And it doesn't have to be perfect. We know that things shift as we move through projects, and some things actually get done sooner and some things get done a little bit later. But this timeline is a sort of a postmark to try to just keep yourself moving along with the project in order to meet your objectives by the end of the project year. This final column is your staff. So that's going to be the primary people responsible for completing that specific activity. You might have multiple people working on one objective, but a different staff member responsible maybe for creating the materials or setting the meetings or whatever that might be, or going to the trainings. Or so the staff will indicate. You can have more than one staff there, as if maybe a couple people are working on that activity, but there should be at least one person that is designated responsible to seeing that that activity is completed in the timeline that it's set out to be. So that is basically the main structure of the work plan. Now there's multiple pages to this template with the idea that perhaps you'll have more than one objective proposed in your proposal, and perhaps that objective for this one is associated with diabetes or diabetes prevention. Here is strategy 3, and maybe your other focus is commercial tobacco use and prevention. And so for the second objective, you would have a different project strategy selected, you would have a different activity selected, different short-term and intermediate outcomes, and then your objective would be related to that commercial tobacco use and exposure and the activities associated with it. If, for example, you're only focusing on diabetes prevention, then these top sections of the strategy, project activity, short and intermediate outcomes will be the same throughout your whole work plan. So those will be repeated. These only need to change if the objective associated with that page is different. So you just want to make sure that this top section relates to this section. And there's multiple pages here. Again, you don't have to use or complete all of these objectives and activities. You don't have to work on every project strategy area. And again, you can choose to change focuses throughout the 5 years if you want. But you can use this template for as much or as little of it as you need. There is a Word version of this template, so if you would like that or would prefer that, we can send you that. Also, if you end up having more than 3 objectives, we can send you an updated work plan version so that you can build on that. So that is your work plan template. And if you have any, actually, in addition to this template, which is totally blank, there is in the RFP sample work plans. So these sample work plans basically are here to help you know how to fill it out, but also because there are many, the staff is asking for a good amount of required project activities, meaning we've really kind of filled in a good portion of your work plan already just by requiring these different things. So these sample work plans can be copied and pasted in a way that makes sense. So not to say that this is the only thing that you need to submit. There will still be some tailoring, but it gives you a really specific example of how that objective could be written and how the activities say, identify and regularly engage a project team, complete the training needs survey, complete the health communication capacity survey. So these things should sound familiar. They are all of the required activities that are listed in the RFP. So please, please, please feel free to use this example as your own work plan. And so for each tier, there's a sample work plan, which really does include most of the required project activities and how they could be written to the work plan template. You will need to add a couple extra things, and there are some things that aren't decided for you. So for example, we've done this as build staff and organizational capacity to implement project strategy 4, which is about heart disease and stroke prevention. So maybe I don't want to send my CHRs to blood pressure control detection and prevention trainings. Maybe I want to actually have that focus be on diabetes or commercial tobacco. So all of these activities could stay the same. Your objectives could stay the same, but maybe the optional activities or trainings that you're wanting to send your staff to are going to vary based off of what your identified needs are. Hopefully that makes sense. So again, you'll see that there's high risk, the prepare to, all of the required project activities are included in these work plan templates. Okay, so those should be very helpful for you in filling out the work plan piece. So tier 2, same thing. There's an example here. It lines out, it's almost identical to number 1, using heart disease and stroke prevention as the example. Again, you can change the strategy that you want to focus on when you submit your own work plan, which would also determine maybe what extra trainings you use. The biggest thing to remember, especially for tier 1 applicants, because your award amount is much larger than tiers 2 and 3, many of these activities don't necessarily cost a lot. So if you are requesting, up to $150,000, you just need to make sure that your budget and whatever you're choosing to spend your award amount on, that those are reflected in your work plan. So if you are sending staff to these trainings, then your budget should reflect the travel and the registration costs for those trainings. If you're hiring staff to complete some of these required project activities, it should include the staff. But perhaps you're also using some of that money to buy blood pressure cuffs so that you can distribute them, or that you can make them available in different organizations throughout the community to increase access to check and monitor blood pressure. So if that's in your budget to purchase those things, then probably an activity associated with purchasing those things, or the purpose of purchasing those things, is either explained in your application or demonstrated somewhere here on the work plan. So basically, in short, making sure that your budget and your work plan makes sense together, and that whatever is in the work plan has funds specifically allocated for that work in the budget, and whatever is listed in the budget has some associated activity included on the work plan. So hopefully that is clear. When it comes to tier 2, 1, 2, and 3, your awards are far smaller. So really, we're not going to try to require much more work than what is already listed in your project requirements. And again, this project year is a little bit shorter than it will be in future years since we're starting in January and ending in September. So you only have 9 months to complete some of those project requirements. So again, don't overcommit yourself to too many things. There's already a lot on here, but if you have the funding and you want to, you have some certain activities that you're wanting to implement, please feel free to do so. But what's included here on the sample Tier 2 work plan is all the required project activities. So again, you could submit something that looked very similar to this. Certainly read through this and make sure that this feels like you can do that and that you understand what your scope of work will be. And then finally with Tier 3, again, it's the same template. And again, the sample Tier 3 work plan has been developed to include all of the project requirements that are listed in the project or in the RFP for Tier 3. One of the things that's different with Tier 3 is that because they have less project requirements, they are required to submit at least one objective supporting an activity. So this is, you know, based off of these listed project strategies and activities, we are expecting that you do implement at least one objective based off of those activities in addition to the required project requirements. So please use these as resources. They really are meant to make it helpful. And this top portion is really intended to sort of be easy, copy and paste, like really making sure that our projects are focused all in the same direction and that we're working towards our intended outcomes. So those are the sample work plans. And again, as always, if you have any questions about any of this, if you want some clarifying questions, if you want a Word document version or need an expanded template to use, please reach out to project staff. We are happy to help you feel clear and confident about your application. Thank you.